Good morning, everyone. This is Josh Hayes with Hedge Plus, and I just want to present our findings and thoughts from this year's crop tour. As you can see on the screen here, the crop tour covers about 70% of the U.S. corn and soybean acres. Obviously, it leaves another 30% uncovered. You can see the area. It's probably the most efficient way to get a really good sample of this year's crop for both corn and beans. On the right, you'll see a chart put together last year by Karen Braun of Reuters. And if you look to the far right, it shows the 2023 USDA versus the Pro Farmer Crop Tour. Crop Tour came in 3.1 bushels per acre lower than what the USDA projected, which I think, as you see throughout this presentation, is kind of a common factor. Moving along here. This is from Pro Farmer themselves, talking about on average what you probably would look to add or subtract from each state. Seems like in states like Iowa and Illinois, they tend to have a higher yield than what the USDA shows, whereas in South Dakota and Minnesota, they tend to subtract. On the right, you'll see Pro Farmer crop yields from this year, early chart showing that their yields, Nebraska, Indiana, South Dakota, Ohio, all coming in below what the USDA is projecting. Again, not abnormal. The main thing you can really gather from this is, and Pro Farmer says it themselves, the better comparison isn't their tour yields versus the USDA. It's more their yields from year to year. So we're going to get into that right here, starting with the next slide. This is from day one, South Dakota. You'll see that in South Dakota, the yield estimate for corn was a little bit lower than last year, and with soybeans, a little bit higher. So those are the key numbers to look at. So very similar to last year in South Dakota. In Ohio, we saw a little bit lower corn this year compared to last, and on soybean, a little bit lower there as well. Might remember that early in the season, Ohio was struggling to get rain. They ended up getting a lot of rain later in the year, or later in the growing season. This chart shows some of the results from day one and day two. Headlines kind of tell the story. Higher pod counts in South Dakota, lower yields in Ohio. Day two, high yielding Indiana and Nebraska crops aim for state records. There were big expectations in those places, but the thoughts from the tour was it might fall a little bit short. So it wasn't all that overwhelming of positive results the first 2 days. Not negative at all, but maybe a little bit shy of what people were expecting. This is a couple graphics just kind of showing what people are seeing. Karen Braun in Nebraska saw yields better than last year, but not quite, I think, what people were expecting. Good size ears in Ohio, but again, that was the state that was more just average crop in relation to past years. Moving on to Indiana, we're starting to see some of the real positive numbers here. Indiana was quite strong. Corn, 7 bushels per acre, nearly above last year. And on soybeans, pod count was over 100 or almost 100 pods stronger than last year. Moving on to Nebraska, better than last year. Not maybe perhaps what people were expecting to see from Nebraska, but again, it's more of a comparison to last year. That's stronger. If you see stronger numbers than the year before, it does go along with the idea that it's going to be a strong year, and the USDA numbers will probably reflect a higher number. Nebraska soybeans, again, a little bit higher than last year, but nothing overwhelmingly so. Illinois, 204 bushels per acre yield estimate, very strong number. Again, maybe didn't blow the doors off people like they thought they might see from Illinois, but very strong compared to last year. So that's the trend you're looking at. Much better than last year. might lend some credence to the idea that Illinois is going to set some records this year. A couple more images here. Iowa, 203, 206 bushels per acre estimates there in this county, Fremont County. Very strong numbers in Illinois, 217.9 and 242.2, just southwest of Decatur, Illinois. Minnesota, this is a final day. This was yesterday's numbers. Minnesota, not surprisingly, a little bit lower than last year, quite a bit lower than last year, actually. I had some major flooding issues and severe weather in Minnesota at some key points early in the season this year, so numbers are quite a bit down from last year. But the soybean numbers are actually quite a bit up, pretty strong there. So that was maybe perhaps a little bit of a surprise. And finally, Iowa, the big one. Iowa, about 10 bushels per acre greater than last year. It's Pro Farmer Tour, so some of the strong numbers the USDA is projecting for Iowa are probably going to be realized there. And same with soybeans, very strong soybean numbers. Kind of wrapping up. So Pro Farmer in this slide puts out their annual reminder why their estimates on Friday are different than the tour results shared Monday through Thursday. So you just saw the numbers, and then today they're going to unveil their final estimates, and that's taking in, all kinds of factors. It's the data they've collected, acreage adjustments they've made, and then they look at their past numbers and compare it to what the USDA came, and they took a look at those averages. Remember earlier in the presentation we saw states where they're generally high and states where they generally are low, so they're always adjusting those numbers. We've put out our take on the crop tour earlier this week. We feel like it's well marketed, it's a fun exercise, it does have some useful information, but we're cautious about drawing any conclusions. Last year's estimate for corn was way off, and we don't track the soybean numbers given how much variability remains in that crop for this time of the year. So we're not really focused on the soybean numbers, and even the corn numbers we take a little bit with a grain of salt. Another little bit of analysis given by Jason here this week. Some of the numbers from the crop tour sound great, no doubt, but there's plenty of evidence of a less than perfect crop. We're seeing it. Some of these states, they got in there and the numbers weren't quite what they were expecting, especially all the great things they've heard. And Jason talks about, to get a 180 per bushels per acre crop on corn, you got to pretty much have perfect crop everywhere. And that's definitely not the case. There's plenty of areas both on this tour and outside of this tour where weather definitely kept them from having a perfect crop. So we're still a little bit skeptical that we'll see a final yield of 180 on corn. Farm Journal talks about how Indiana's corn and soybeans are coming on strong, but Nebraska's might be a little bit disappointing. Just kind of more of an example of how from place to place, it's been a little inconsistent. So all in all, nothing that we feel it should be too bearish for the markets. We don't think we're going to set records everywhere. Definitely going to set records in certain places. But we do still think that the expectation of yields, I think we're going to see numbers a little bit lower than what the expectations are. And once we get past this tour and once the USDA finalizes its numbers, we think we're going to have a little bit smaller crop than the records and the eye-popping numbers everyone has been suggesting. Thanks for listening and have a great day.